and they're dealing with what's happening in the moment rather than the existential questions of, I guess we're not alone in the universe, because as a teenager, you live in the moment. Hi, I'm Benjamin Hunting, the creator, co-creator, and writer of ModelUN. You can find the Kickstarter at modeluncomic.com, and you can find me at benjaminhunting.com and on Instagram at huntingbenjamin. And you're watching and listening to Two Geeks Talking.
Good morning, afternoon, evening, everyone. Two Geeks Talking is an entertainment industry interview show where we interview the creative people from the comic, film, TV, movie, and video game industries. And of course, I'm your host, Kurt Sasso. We are joined today by a very talented comic creator. He's a co-creator of an amazing comic called ModelUN. That in itself is a fun name. Great comic, great atmosphere from what I've seen here so far. Kickstarter coming up. I'm rambling here. Let's dive into who we are talking today. We're joined by the ever-talented Benjamin Hunting. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Doing good. For those that don't know anything about yourself as a creative person, tell us who you are and what you're bringing to Two Geeks Talking today.
I'm a professional writer, but mostly in the automotive space and culture space. But I've been creating comics for the last 5 years or so. In 2020, I put out a book called Code 45, which was released by Scout Comics and is thankfully no longer released by Scout Comics. That was not a great experience. And if you're listening, if you're an independent creator, don't go with Scout Comics. Following that, we put out another book, the same creative team, called Dead Air, which is in its second issue. And now I'm working on something that's completely different for me personally as a storytelling device. And that's ModelUN, which is kind of a manga style black and white comic that I'm having a lot of fun with because it's the first time I've written something that isn't totally sad all the time. And it was nice to shift out of that mind space and write something that was just fun and comic and sci-fi.
Nice.
That's where I am with that.
You know, the premise of ModelUN is actually brilliant. It's a brilliant, fun concept. That's what I loved about just looking at it here. I can't wait for this Kickstarter, which we'll talk about here. Walk me through the moment this idea clicked. Was it a what-if scenario, a personal experience in ModelUN, or something else entirely?
So it's kind of a personal and non-personal at the same time, which I'll explain. But what happened was a previous book I was working on went on hiatus because one of my collaborators fell ill, and they're in the middle of recovery. And I was like, okay, what am I going to do with my time now? And I had this phrase, just the two words ModelUN, kicking around in my head, and it seemed like it would be fun to do. But when I was originally thinking about it, I was like, what if it was kind of a Freaks and Geeks style slice of life book where it was these kind of misfit kids who are in a ModelUN club, and that's what gathers them all together. And then you just kind of see what their life is like over the school year or something like that. And I thought, I'm not a huge manga fan. I don't know a lot about it. I've been learning, but what I have liked about manga is the way it tells stories.
Yeah.
And I thought that format of a narrative would fit really well with the idea of these kids. And so I'm talking to, I was talking to a friend of mine, an artist, and I was like, what do you think would be more interesting? The idea that of the slice of life story where we're just seeing like a normal life of high school kids in the 90s? Or what if there was some kind of like inciting incident where maybe aliens showed up or something? And instantaneously he's like, oh, definitely the aliens. Like that's way more interesting. Your other thing, total crap. But the aliens thing, that might actually work. And I was like, well, that's pretty brutal, but thank you for the assist. And I went down that path and I started to think about what it would be like if you had these kids who are ostensibly, whenever you have a group, I never got to be in ModelUN. There was nothing like that in my high school. And I'd always been curious about it. It looked like a lot of fun, or at least just something interesting. And so I'd always had a passing interest in it. And then I was like, the idea of using a ModelUN to gather together very different personalities. You're going to have kids who are super into it and take it too seriously. You're going to have kids who are just there because they have to be there for the credit. And then you're going to have the kids who are just kind of floating through life because they're like 17, 18 years old. They're about to graduate. They don't really know what's going on. So it's a way to create a hierarchy that involves those kids and see how they act inside of it. That's outside of the traditional high school hierarchy. You can still have bullies and jocks and whatever, but that's not the guiding force for what's bringing these kids together or putting them in conflict. And then by bringing in these aliens, I decided to make the leadership of the aliens really dumb. You have to be pretty stupid if you show up on a planet and mistake a school's after hours club for the leadership of that planet. And I wanted to make the leaders so obstinate and stubborn that they refused to believe anything other than their initial analysis, despite the crew being like, hey, maybe this isn't the actual UN, and maybe the UN that's contacting us frantically are the actual UN. And you end up with this second hierarchy where you can explore how power and nepo babies and people who don't earn their positions end up in authority, and they become these immovable objects when faced with reason. Like there's just you can't get past them. So it was these two different hierarchies, the school hierarchy we've all seen before with the model UN twist, and then this the alien hierarchy kind of lets us explore how power exists in the world. And I wanted to do all of that in a funny way. So that's the long-winded version of where this story came from.
That's what I also loved about this is when it comes down to it, you have those tropes, you have everything like that here. You're trying to get a fresh twist on it. And I thank your friend for being brutally honest to the point of that, because it could have just been another ho-hum, oh, I've seen this manga a million times here. So I'm glad that you took the leap and said, aliens, why not? It's 90s. You gotta do it. In the early stages, what did you identify as the single biggest point of failure for this concept?
Single biggest point of failure. That's a really interesting question. I hadn't considered that before. I can tell you that when I was putting it together, I had scenes in the original book where there was an explanation as to why the aliens had specifically chosen this school. And I had like 5 or 6 pages devoted to why that had happened. And I was super proud of it. I was like, oh, this is so neat. And it wraps everything up. And of course, everyone would be interested in it. And my editor was like, this needs to go. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, it's such an elegant way to solve this problem. And he's like, no one's interested in this problem. He's like, the only thing that matters is the aliens are there. It doesn't matter why they're there. These kids aren't going to do this forensic work to determine why they're suddenly have the fate of the earth in their hands. They're just going to be dealing with the fact that they have the fate of the earth in their hands. And he was right. Like I had this whole section of the book where all the action stopped and we get this like 5 pages of exposition that didn't need to be there. And it was this perfect example of why an outside perspective is so important when you're writing a book, and just having someone who can be like, I was with your story until you did this, and then all the energy just left, and you think it's cool, but no one else is going to think that. And I think as a point of failure, that was a blind spot for me. Like I thought that everyone needed to know everything and that they needed to have everything explained. And in reality, I think interesting stories are interesting because your brain is trying to figure things out, not because you're being spoon fed what's happening, So I think that I guess I'd go with that.
It's also interesting that you're so invested in your creativity. You're so invested in the story and the characters and everything like that, that you, even if you shop it around, even if you get beta readers or whatever to go through it, you need that outside perspective. That isn't just to say, yeah, this is awesome, this is great. Oh yeah, I completely read all 54 pages.
Yeah. You need people who aren't your friends.
Right.
You need people who are looking at it because you're paying them to look at it and it's their job, and they've looked at 100 other ones just like yours or slightly different than yours or whatever, and they have this framework they can approach it from. And what was cool was, in that, as a part of that process, the editor was like pointing out on all these other pages, look, this is explanation enough. You already have all of these hooks in here where people will understand why the aliens are here. That's all you need. You don't need to go into the long-winded Encyclopedia Britannica version of it. So, and it was a good save in another way, because I set a challenge for myself. I've never done manga before or anything manga like. I'm not even gonna. I say this is a manga, but I feel weird saying that because I'm not an expert, and I'm sure someone's gonna read my book and be like, "This isn't manga," and throw it in the air and like walk away in disgust. But I set the challenge to try and tell the story in like 100 to 120 pages, because I wanted to be economical in the narrative and have it move quickly and be interesting. I don't trust myself to do like a really long extended version of the story. I don't know how great that would be. So that was I find sometimes restrictions can breed interesting storytelling because you have to work within a framework that you've imposed on yourself. So that was, by having this section removed, it gave me more room to do other stuff that people will actually like. So
But that also goes to show that you're invested in your creativity. That also shows that you wanted to do a tight story, which, to be perfectly honest, I think some films and TV series could learn from that method of tight editing, like what I do with my show too.
I had just watched the last Mission Impossible movie, and I mean, perfect example of something that could have been. It's 6 hours of film if you include the first part. It could have been 2.5 hours, and I don't know whether it's streaming style television, high culture television that's leaking into cinema, where people feel the need to explore every single aspect of the story instead of just keeping a narrative moving, or giving characters backstories that they don't need,
Mhm.
or whatever it is that's padding things out. But I completely agree that there's this huge trend for movies to try to do things that television typically does, and that's unfortunate. I think you also see it on television. You see the reverse, right? You see an 8-part series that could have been a 3-part series, or maybe an hour and a half movie.
Yeah. When it comes to streaming, when it comes to the conscious, when it comes to attention spans, it's very hard to stick with a piece of medium and consume it, which is why I love comics like ModelUN, because you have a tight story, you have a great batch of characters, and you're invested in it from page one on. So it's good to show that you're keeping your own comic in just in one piece. And if you decide to expand upon it, you probably can, and we'll talk about that in a little bit for sure. But it's amazing the creativity of every guest that I have on the show. Everyone is just focused on, what do I want to make that people will enjoy.
A lot of when I'm writing, it's strange because my primary audience is me. Like I'm writing something that I think will be interesting, and then the next stage for me is anyone else going to connect with this? Like, am I so far up my own whatever that no one is going to understand this reference? No one is going to find this weird intricate thing that I'm exploring interesting. I don't mean it to sound egotistical when I say I'm writing for myself, because I think that you have to be really interested in your story in order for other people to be interested. If you're just dashing something off and it's, genre of the week or whatever, because people like this style of work, if there's nothing of you inside of it, then I find it can be very hollow to read and hard to connect with. But if I read something that someone was clearly passionate about, even if I'm not passionate about it, I can connect with their passion, even if I don't connect with the subject matter.
Mm.
And so I try to find that passion in myself when I'm creating something. And then the next stage is like, well, this is passionate, but is it obtuse? And like, then I gotta make it readable for other people, or at least understandable. And what was interesting with this book is I'm working with an artist named I.E. Santiana Hernandez for the first time, and he's younger than I am by a fair margin. I'd say about 15 years. And so I was a teenager in the 90s. I've got these cultural references. I know what hairstyles look like and how people talked and how they dressed. Although, since we're in school uniforms, that's a little bit easier. I had to talk him through that. And I had to interrogate myself to be able to explain to him how things worked. I couldn't just assume, oh, he knows what bands were popular. He knows that you couldn't wear a mohawk to a private school. Turns out he didn't. So like we had to do some corrections on some of the early art when we're working on layout. And it was fun because it also, by having an outside perspective like that from him as an artist, I have to look at things for a second or a third time and be like, what kind of weird assumptions am I making here that are going to trip up the reader?
That's the other thing here is it's 30 some odd years ago, the 90s, like I know, trust me, I'm 100% with you on this one. Yeah, I went to high school in the early 90s. That's a lifetime ago, quite literally.
That's the 60s when we were in the 90s.
Yes, everything's cyclical, man. Everything's cyclical. The fact that you're dealing with a younger artist, the fact that you had to talk him through, as you just mentioned, the styles of the 90s there. What was a piece of artwork you got back that just was completely different from the script that blew you away?
That blew me away. It's a bit of a spoiler, so I'm gonna have to talk around it. IE had some incredible ideas about how the aliens should present themselves that I had not considered whatsoever. He came up with a way for the aliens to present themselves to humans in a certain way, and then when they were on their own ship, they were presenting themselves a different way. And it added so much to the story. It was just a suggestion that he had made, and he had done some early art on it, and we were able to push past it and create something out of it that really helped the narrative along. And I don't know if I would have come to that by myself. That was really impressive. I was really grateful for him in helping create that aspect of the story.
Let's dive into the characters here as well, because this particular manga seems that it's a play on the universal teenage feelings of being an imposter. How much faking it until you make it is drawn from your own life or observation?
When I was a teenager, I was ridiculously overconfident, and it got me into all kinds of trouble because I did not know anything about the world, and I thought I did. And I went to a private school like the one in the book. It was based on, I wasn't a boarding student, but it was based on the British boarding boarding school model because I'd been expelled from the only public high school in my area. There are not a lot of English schools in Quebec, so especially in a rural area where I grew up. So there were not very many options, and I ended up at this school, and I got into trouble all the time. I was lucky to finish high school. I think I got suspended like 3 times in the final year just because I was sassy and I had a smart mouth and I didn't really care. I didn't lack confidence, but like the confidence was entirely misplaced. And like I try to be gentle with myself when I look back on my teenage years, but like I was a huge problem for a lot of people. In this book, to more directly answer your question, the biggest way that that comes out, the idea of being an imposter or not understanding your own self, not understanding how to deal with a situation, it comes out in the way that people who were established as leaders inside the hierarchy of the ModelUN, people who are really keen about it, maybe they turn out to not be as capable of dealing with the situation as they thought. And you end up with people who were on the fringes of the group who step forward and discover that, hi, I'm actually a leader and I didn't know that, but I'm taking charge of this situation because I'm worried everyone's going to get killed. And that was a fun dynamic to work with, where you have people who learn things about themselves because of what's going on around them. As a storyteller, it's fun to do that because you're not telling people who the character is, you're showing people who the character is. And both the reader and the character are discovering that in the same moment.
That whole "take me to your leader" takes on a whole new avenue when it comes to
Yeah.
world-ending cataclysms.
I mean, I don't know how you would react if aliens just showed up. As a teenager, I have no idea what I would do.
Yeah.
Like, I was so X-Files pilled in that
Oh
part of
yeah.
my life. Like, I would have been alternating between pure terror and just utter fascination, but that might have resulted in me being frozen to the ground like a statue. I have no idea, you know? Even today, I would probably be completely terrified. With these kids, one thing that I wanted to do with the story was I'm not interrogating too much about how they react in the sense that they're not like, oh, wow, aliens exist. You know, like that's not part of it. It's like, well, aliens are here
Mm.
and they're dealing with what's happening in the moment rather than the existential questions of, I guess we're not alone in the universe, you know, because as a teenager, you live in the moment. You're not necessarily thinking about the future in the same way that an adult does. You have an abstract idea of the future, like one day I have to get a full-time job, one day I might go to college, whatever. But your emotions, especially, anchor you to the present. In a way, even though they're completely unprepared for what's happening to them, they're maybe the best prepared for dealing with this crisis as it occurs. I'm not advocating for the United Nations to create like a teenage response squad for alien encounters, but maybe we should think about it.
I mean, it's worked for Star Trek and sci-fi. I mean, why can't it work for
So
real
many
life?
times.
You're also using intergalactic diplomacy as a metaphor for high school social dynamics. What are the most surprising parallels you've discovered between UN parliamentary procedure and navigating cliques, crushes, and final exams?
The most surprising aspects are like the sheer uselessness of bureaucracy. There's a lot of stuff that happens in this ModelUN club because, you know, the people who are running it are super into it. They're the keeners have read Robert's Rules of Order. They know every paragraph and every subsection of whatever they need to do to get a meeting move forward and to pass a motion and this and that. And to them, they're heavily invested in that aspect of the world. And in the high school that I went to, there was a huge focus on hierarchy based on tradition. And tradition is just something that people have done because they've always done it. And perhaps at one point in a tribal perspective, it served humanity because it kept people from eating things that were poison or kept them from playing with animals that had spiky teeth. In a modern context, tradition can seem completely bizarre and arbitrary. That aspect of the experience, and you contrast it against how the aliens are acting, where they have their own problems with this leadership, where they have no real mechanism to deal with the fact that perhaps the leader is detached from the reality of the situation. That was something that let me highlight what I didn't like about my own high school experience. I think when you establish a structure and a hierarchy, especially with children, you can lose humanity. I kind of wanted to underscore that aspect.
The mid-90s setting is very specific pre-high-speed internet / pre-smartphone vibe. Beyond the nostalgia, which we all know and love, how does that time period actively serve the plot? And why can't you make this story happen in 2025?
One of the reasons I choose the 90s is exactly for the reasons you just laid out. I think back to a lot of storytelling from the 90s that I enjoyed. I was a big Buffy the Vampire Slayer fan. If you look at Buffy as a narratively, so many episodes are based on the fact that people are in trouble, no one knows where Buffy is, and you have to resolve that issue so she can save them. If people are in trouble and all they have to do is text, "Hey Buffy, we're at the cemetery and we're about to get eaten by vampires." That's a 10-minute episode. I like the fact that without this instantaneous communications technology, without having the world at your fingertips, everything is more immediate in the moment. It also enhances the idea that these kids are cut off from the world. Like they can't just reach out, they can't send an email, or maybe I mean, email exists, right? But it's not on your phone, it's not in your pocket. Maybe you have a computer in the library kind of deal. You don't have this instantaneous lifeline. You have to figure things out as they're happening. The current moment really sucks in a lot of ways. And when I'm creating a story, I don't want to dwell in a moment that sucks. I want to inhabit a world where I'm not dealing with the problems that I have to deal today, or that society or just the globe in general has to deal with. So pushing back to the 90s lets me do that. I think that the interesting thing about the 90s too is there is technology, but it hasn't become pervasive in our lives yet. So if you do need to use it, it's available. You don't have social media, you don't have likes, you don't have constant contact with an employer, you don't have surveillance capitalism. Like none of that stuff is there. So you don't have to write that into your story. You can ignore technology until you want to use it. Whereas if you're writing a story today, you can't, if you ignore technology, it becomes part of the story. Like people will notice that and it'll feel anachronistic. Like why is no one talking on the phone? It's almost like when you give characters strange dialects to use and they're using a whole bunch of slang that no one actually uses in real life. And you're watching, like this is a movie called Things to Do in Denver When You're Dead, where essentially it was a modern gangster movie, like late 90s, early 2000s. I can't remember exactly when, but the writer gave everyone this super specific slang in this gangster world. And you watch it today or even then, and you're completely taken out of the story because it makes no sense. Like you need a lexicon to get through the story. And it's a huge failing of the film. And I feel like if you were to do a modern story where you ignore technology, it would be the same thing. It's like you're just taking the readers out of the moment.
I'm going to ask this question here because it kind of segues into what we're going to go for in the next batch of questions. But if you were part of this particular cast here, what country would you be and why, other than the one that you're currently living in?
Other than Canada, which is like always the safe choice, right?
Exactly. Or Switzerland, right? Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. I think I would probably be one of like the lesser islands, like somewhere where there's no real responsibility or resources, or like where you're almost an observer at the United Nations. And of course, whatever country I say now, everyone there is going to hate me. So I'm just gonna say like the Outer Hebrides or something, or like the Shetland Islands off of Scotland, or perhaps I know that's not its own country. I can't really choose that. Maybe Iceland. Maybe I don't know. Vanuatu, is that an island in the Pacific? Like a very small, or an atoll? Like maybe I'm not even a country. Maybe I'm just an atoll. Like I have a nice lagoon and it's sunny and rising sea levels have doomed my people. That kind of thing. Yeah.
So Japan or the Falkland Islands, basically.
Well, I think Japan's got mountains, so they're going to be okay.
Oh.
But the Falklands might be in trouble.
How deep did you go into the actual rules of procedure for ModelUN? Where did you choose to prioritize comedy and narrative pace over absolute accuracy? And were you ever tempted just to go full nerd with it?
So it was tempting to go full nerd. I was able to slake that thirst by creating a character who was full nerd. And then you can either choose to highlight or sideline that character as the story needs it to happen. For the actual ModelUN rules and regulations and whatnot, I didn't get too deep into how the UN operates, but what I did do was pull from my own experiences with student government when I was younger. I had some friends who were really into student government, and I tangentially became involved. So in Quebec, we have a pre-college thing called Cégep, which is like a 2-year program. You get a diploma. It's after high school, but before university. Kind of weird. There's no real American analog to it. But they had a student government thing running there, and there was like a chief electoral officer position that paid a small stipend. And my friends in the school government got me that position so I could have the stipend. So this meant I had to go to meetings. So I used all of the memories I had of these meetings and watching people bicker and like literally have like Robert's Rules of Order open in front of them and like going paragraph by paragraph and being like, well, you can't hold this vote and you can't do this and you can't do that. And then it can get really petty. So that's what I pulled from mostly. And that allows for its own comedy because these kids, some will try to do it by the book, some won't, but no one's going to get it perfect. So in the discrepancies between those attitudes is where I think you find the humor.
Now, comic creation obviously is a marathon, especially co-creating with an amazing artist that you have here. What's a productivity hack or tool that you've used that's really increased your productivity and your efficiency when it comes to your writing?
I started using an application called Scrivener. On my first comic book, I wrote it almost entirely in Word, which is fine. And I use like Word 2002, like the most simple,
Yeah.
really old version. I don't need macros and all that stuff. That's fine for writing, but what I discovered with comic books is really it's about organizing a story. And what I liked about Scrivener is the writing tool is fine and it has some scripting stuff in it that makes it easier for like instead of having to indent and do all your dialogue and whatnot, it formats that for you. But the real weapon that it provides is you have multiple window panes where you can move. It's almost like having a whiteboard or a noteboard where you can move pages around. You can visualize the flow of your story. I was able to write a page and then on the side have a bunch of notes about the page. I could cut things from the page and still attach them to the page on the side in case I wanted to use them later. So it was a way to map out a narrative in a way that Word just didn't let me do. It has been vital for getting stuff done. It's really an incredible way to organize my thoughts about a story specifically and to marry those thoughts to an outline that makes sense and not get lost. Like I'm not scrolling up and down a 55-page document trying to find the last time I referenced something. I can just click on page 25 and be like, okay, page 25 should be page 26 now. And it's that easy. And the other cool thing, and this is super comic specific, is I can set up the panel to view everything as like odd, even, odd, even. So I see all of my page breaks. And you can't do that in Word. Like you can't do that effectively. That was a huge deal for me. And I realized that there's like 1,000 people listening to this who have used Scrivener for 15 years or something. Yeah. And they're like, wow, you're discovering Scrivener now? We're going to show you the wheel next. And it's really going to blow your mind.
Don't tell him about fire. He's not ready for that yet. If a reader could take away one feeling or one piece of applied knowledge from Velma's story, what would you want it to be?
Other people don't define who you are. When we're teenagers, especially, there are so many things influencing us. And many of those things are external. And it can be not tempting, but there can be a huge amount of pressure to go with the flow because it's what everyone around you is doing, or it's because what people in authority are doing, or it's because what people you respect are doing. And when that happens, you can lose your sense of self and you can start using externalities to define who you are. And that can make things really confusing because even if you don't consciously know who you are, subconsciously you have a self. And when that comes into conflict with how you act in the world, it's not great. And you don't have a ton of tools to deal with that as a teenager. Yeah, that's what I would say. It's like things that you're feeling inside of you and the way that you feel about yourself, it's valid and it's real. And if it's in conflict with your situation, that doesn't make it any less valid.
We have to talk about the Kickstarter campaign, obviously, because that is currently ongoing here. Talk to us about this Kickstarter. This isn't your first one, obviously. It is a marathon, not a sprint, etc. All those wonderful cliches that we use for crowdfunding these days. What are you excited about this particular Kickstarter campaign? Where can we find it? And what are some of the products that we can expect to be enthralled by?
So it can be found at modeluncomic.com. That URL will take you to the Kickstarter. And on Kickstarter, if you're already there, just type in ModelUN. I'm pretty sure I'm the only one with that title on Kickstarter so far. So you should find the campaign that way. I don't know if excited is the word I would use, more than nervous, because for the very first time, this is my 6th or 7th campaign, but this is the first one I've ever done where it's completely digital. And the reason for that is tariffs. I'm in Canada. And I cannot reliably predict what it will cost to send a book across the border anymore to the United States. The situation is so fluid and changes week to week. When you're printing a book, you need to have a certain amount of cost certainty locked in because you tell a printer, okay, go, and then they give you a date when your book will be ready. And it could be a month, could be 2 months, could be a week. At that point, you're frozen in. And if suddenly there's a duty to be paid at the border or a tariff that increases the cost substantially, that can be just a nightmare for everyone. 80% of the readership in the past for me and the co-creators I've worked with has been in the United States. And I wasn't about to make anybody pay a huge amount when they picked up their package at the post office that they were not expecting. So this is my first digital only tariff oriented campaign where I send a digital file and they paid what they paid. I'm not a fan of campaigns where like the shipping is calculated after you've made your pledge. And to me, like with tariffs, it's an extreme version of that. And it's completely out of anyone's hands. I had thought, okay, maybe things will calm down in the fall. Maybe there'll be a treaty, maybe something between Canada and the US. It hasn't happened. On the flip side of that, the European Union has also instituted a ton of new rules about product safety,
Mm.
where you have to have a representative who lives in the EU and is willing to vouch for your product, and so you can get the CE mark or the application mark to actually have something cross its borders in a package. And it applies even to books. Like, it sounds weird, but books have to be certified as safe. And there was a lot of weird questions about whether that included content
Mm.
when it first went up. I believe it started in January of this year. And I've been working with some other Canadian creators to figure out the best way to, find a representative and smooth out the process. But that's still ongoing. So I was trapped in this weird world where I could only ship books to Canada, which is fine, but it's not enough for me to fund a full Kickstarter.
Sure.
So going digital, it completely rebooted everything for me in terms of rewards. I couldn't really use the same framework that I'd had for past Kickstarters. We've had amazing success in crowdfunding, and I'm super grateful to everyone who has helped make that happen. I think crowdfunding is an incredible tool for independent creators, and I have no idea what I would be doing if it didn't exist. But I can't send original art this time. I can't send cool art prints. We were even doing, like, we had buttons, 3D printed stuff. We had folded paper toys on some of our campaigns, because I was thankful to be working with a co-creator, Angela Hodge, who's a product designer professionally. That's what she does for a living. So she was able to look at a campaign and be like, oh, I can make this, this, and this out of it. And it was an interesting way to look at things. But with digital, where I'm going is, obviously you're going to be able to get the story, of course, in a PDF. I'm also putting together a package where you get the script and the layout. And I've done that in the past, but this time I'm going a step further, where I'm going to be including parts of the script that didn't make it
Mm.
into the book as kind of a deleted scenes feature, but also layout pages that were not chosen. So when I was working with IE, he often provided 2 or 3 different versions of a page, and he wanted me to choose what I thought was best. And often it was just a starting point for conversation, and we would come to a conclusion that combined elements from different pages. But I still have those original layout pages. And I think it's interesting for some people to see how you arrive at what makes it to the final page and why you make those decisions and choices. And so I'm going to include something where I walk people through the decision process in that area. And of course, some sketches and whatnot that were not included in the book for whatever reason, or ways we didn't go with characters. And then we're going to have a couple of tiers where you can access my previous work. So Code 45 and 2 issues of Dead Air will be available. My PR partner, Jeff Haas, has graciously provided a bundle of independent comic books that we're also going to be offering as a separate tier. So if you want to get in on well more than a dozen different creators to see what they have to offer and maybe get a taste for that, and then go check out more of their work, that's going to be available as well.
Wonderful. All right, let's dive into some introspective questions,
Okay.
because it's been a real easy conversation so far. So let's go right into your psyche, and I'm not responsible for your therapist bills, so it is what it is. Luckily, it's probably covered by a HIP, so we're all good. Everyone has one person that inspired them on their path to where they are today. Who was that for you?
Okay. It's funny you should ask this, because it's Saturday morning and I slept in a little bit. And last night I had a dream. And before you gnash your teeth and they're like, oh, you're going to hear about someone's dream. Um, I won't go into the details, but I had a dream about a teacher that I had in Cégep who had encouraged my writing. After the encounter in the dream, I started composing a letter that I wanted to write to this person to let them know that this is what I do for a living now. I've been a full-time writer for 17, 18 years. I wanted to let them know that, hey, you made a difference and I actually did this and it's working. And then I woke up and realized it was all a dream. And I started thinking about the fact that when I was younger, nobody presented writing as a viable career. It was always something that you could do if you wanted, but no one took it seriously. No one was like, yeah, here's how you become a professional writer. Here's the path that takes you from schooling to selling your words for a living. Despite that, there were always a few teachers in high school, a few teachers in CEGEP who encouraged me to keep writing, who were like, they didn't present it as something that maybe I would do for a living, but they saw that it was something that I had an interest in and an aptitude for, and they encouraged that. And I appreciate that very much. I try to be that person for anyone who tells me they want to be a writer. I'm like, yeah, go for it. Do it. Just start doing it. Like this, there's no need to gatekeep that kind of thing. I think that maybe my parents would be a really good example of helping me out by not stepping in my way. When I left high school, I had to choose a program to specialize in for secondary or post-secondary education. And I chose sciences because I'd always, I've been programming computers since I was a kid. And in fact, I worked in IT and programming in the late 90s and early 2000s for a number of years before I got completely burnt out and just became a writer.
Mhm.
And I didn't really need to go to school to do that. It's just something I'd always been doing. But there was so much pressure for science, technology, medicine, and engineering, right? Like there's a lot of, at least in that period, where you were told as a kid, if you didn't get into that, you weren't going to have a career, you were going to live in the gutter, and you would be just in poverty your entire life. And the whole future was science and technology. And I bought into that. I bought into that being the only path forward for me. And then I did it for a semester, and things did not go well. I decided to change into a creative arts program. And I was worried about how my family would react. I don't know why, because they'd never given me any inclination to indicate that they would be upset that I made a life choice. But I remember being really hesitant to tell them I was going to do this completely different thing. And they were like, oh, well, we kind of didn't understand why you went into sciences in the first place. Like, it always seemed like writing was your first love. So we're happy that you're making this choice. And I was so exasperated. I was like, if you felt this way, why didn't you tell me that I should go into writing? And they're like, well, we're not going to make that decision for you. Like, that's something you had to figure out. And so they stayed out of my way and things worked out. But at the same time, I kind of wish more people had pushed me to do writing from the get-go. So that's a very long-winded answer, and I'm sorry for that. I don't even know if I answered the question.
It was good. Yeah, 20 years in IT, system admin, the whole bit. That's what I did, and then I got burnt out with the industry. I was working at a 3.5 year call center job.
Oh man,
60 to 80 calls a day with pissed off Americans with AT&T Uvers, and I was fried. I was done at that point. And
yeah.
my guy next to me was the hockey recruiter for Ryerson or whatever it's called now. And he's like, just go back to university, do something. Cause you go to these Comic-Cons, you interview these people, you're so energized when you come back, and then you're just like depressed again. So let me help you. So he helped me get into Windsor.
I'm so happy to hear that. That's very cool.
I took communication, media, and film, and visual arts, a double major, because that was fun. And visual arts was actual fine art. I'm just like, what did I get myself into for 4 years? From a professional standpoint, you are a successful writer for the past 17, 18 years. You're successful with your other campaigns as well. And I'm looking forward to ModelUN to be a success as well. Do you consider yourself personally successful?
Yeah, definitely. I want to preface that by saying earlier I was talking about external definitions or external pressures when you're young about who you are and whatnot. And I feel like when it comes to success, you have to define what that means for you. Because if you use an external definition of success, you'll be chasing it forever. I've seen it with friends who are, by all societal measures, extremely successful, whether it's financially or professionally or whatever you want to call it. And yet they're not happy, and they're constantly in motion, and they're constantly striving for something new and something to push to whatever the next level they perceive is. And I viewed that as a cautionary tale. For me, success means living life on my own terms, engaging with, and this is going to sound crazy, but engaging with the capitalism that surrounds us in a way that is least damaging to me and that fits into my own values and lifestyle. I've made a lot of decisions. Part of why I chose to become a freelance writer from the beginning was because I didn't want to have a job. I haven't had a job in maybe 20 years. I was in consulting and IT before I became a freelance writer. I'm pretty much unemployable at this point in my life. Like I can't engage with traditional employment. So much of how I live has been designed to make me feel comfortable in the world. And I feel like I've finally achieved that over the last few years, even though the world itself has let me down in a lot of ways, just in general. I'm trying to be in it in a way that's healthy for me. And that feels like success to me. Just the fact that I wake up in the morning, I create a whole bunch of words, I put them out in the world, and so many people read them. And I could not have imagined that as a kid. I couldn't have imagined that I would, like, when you and I were growing up, there was no internet. The idea of an audience that's so accessible like that is such an insane idea. Like in the 80s as a child, you had to be one of the 12 people working at a huge magazine to do that,
Mm.
or you had to be a successful novelist, or you had to be a talking head on television. And now the opportunities in media are so huge. I work with really amazing editors and teams of writers at publications that I read when I was a kid.
Mm.
And those words go out and people read them and they contact me about them and there's a dialogue. And I can't explain how incredible that feels and how wild that seems to me. And I'll never get used to that, like at all. It's incredible.
External validation in the form of people that comment on a video or your article or your books. It's something that you're right. Back in the 80s and 90s, we just didn't have. It's like you were telling everyone in your class or whatever, oh, hey, I do this. And it's like, okay, cool. And they'd go off and do something else. It's like, things like that. But it's amazing the connection and yet disconnection we have when it comes to the internet and people in general. But I'm glad you're finding those connections in a positive way.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and when I say connections, most of those connections aren't coming from social media. So I do want to mention that I don't think you should be, I'm not gonna be prescriptive when I'm talking about what people should and shouldn't do. But to me, that's not, for me personally, that's not a healthy way to engage. Like I feel like that's something that has to be done in moderation and with limits that are healthy.
Right. The reverse of success is failure. How do you deal with your failures?
I've been fired from almost every job I've ever had. Remember earlier when I was talking about being unemployable? There was always something after that, every single time. In the almost 20 years I've been freelance writing, I've 2 or 3 times lost clients who were more than half my income because of decisions that had nothing to do with me. A company decides to go in a different direction, a magazine goes out of business. You can't control these things. The only thing you can control is what you do next. What I have discovered is, just like when I was getting fired, is there's always another job, there's always another client, there's always something else to write about. Failure is honestly the tuition you pay for success. There are lessons you can't learn until you fall flat on your face and are sitting there at your desk wondering, what do I do next? And silently panicking inside because you've got a mortgage to pay and you have groceries to buy. After it happens like 6 or 7 times, you don't panic anymore. You just put the plan into action and you keep on moving with your life and you rebuild back to a level that you need to survive, or that makes you comfortable, or whatever it is you're trying to achieve. So early on, I think that failure did feel kind of stark, like a personal judgment, like, oh, I did something wrong and I'm being judged for that, whatever that decision was. But you eventually learn that you can't control the world around you. You just have to control how you interact with it. And that helped me a lot. So I also was in the music business after IT for a while, and failure is like the trade of the music business. That is, so many acts fail, and you can throw so many events that don't do well, and you can book so many tours that don't do well. And it's like, it's not necessarily about you. It's about the moment that you're in. It's about decisions that you made that maybe weren't the right decisions for that time, and so it's always a learning experience. And it sounds really trite to say that, but it's honestly true. So it's one of those really annoying things where people tell you, oh, you're going to learn from this. And then like 10 years later, you look back and you're like, hey, I really did learn from that. Thank you, random stranger that I hated at the time.
Yeah, like sticking a penny in a light socket.
Exactly. You do that once or maybe twice if you like it, right? But
How do you think my hair got like this? No, I'm just
there you go.
Yeah. If your life was a comic book, what would its title be? And what would its soundtrack be?
Oof. The title would probably be Weird Hermit Who Lives in the Woods. And the soundtrack would definitely be Portishead, first and second albums.
Nice.
Yeah, I think that's what I would go with. Or something from James Horner. Those are my 2 choices.
Yes. If you could put together a 90s soundtrack for ModelUN with 5 tracks, what would it be?
So it's funny that you asked that, because I have a radio show on a local
nice.
FM station, a 90s show. So I think about this on a weekly basis. For ModelUN, though, it's 1996. So I'm going to be including probably the first Wu-Tang album, Protect Your Neck, because some of the kids in there think they're way cooler than they are. And they're going to be definitely listening to that record to psych themselves up before they go into a ModelUN session. There's going to be some Daniel Bélanger, who's a very amazing Québécois singer, performer, songwriter from the 90s. So something like C'est Je te plaire or La Folie en Quatre or something like that. I got 3 more tracks to go through. Portishead. Actually, no, I'm going to go second album. I'm going to go with Humming, which I think is a pretty awesome track to kick off any kind of psych up session, and then feel really sad about it. Like it gets you going and then you're just super depressed. I was really into Nirvana in that period of my life. I was in a bunch of garage bands. We played a lot of Nirvana. So I would go with Aneurysm by Nirvana, the live version that they played, not the single version. So like something off like Live at the Paramount.
Yeah.
Man, I got one more song. Okay, PJ Harvey, Rid of Me from the 4-track demos.
There you go. 5 tracks to break off a ModelUN reading session there.
Feel weird while you're listening.
Well, Benjamin, I do hate to say, but that ends this particular episode of Two Geeks Talking. I do want to thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you. I had a blast. This is really great. I mean, Saturday morning, you don't know how things are going to go, and this went as this is great. Like I very much enjoyed this.
Thank you. But we have to support you. So where can we find you? How can we support you? Where's the campaign and anything else you'd like to promote?
Thank you for the opportunity. If you want to find the campaign, ModelUNcomic.com is the easiest way. And you can also search ModelUN on Kickstarter. On my own personal website, benjaminhunting.com, you can find info about ModelUN. I put a lot of background stuff as the campaign goes on that site, in addition to updates on the campaign. But you can also find my other books, Code 45 and Dead Air are available there as well. And finally, you can find me on Instagram. It's the social media I like the most because no one's really mean to me there. It's like everyone's just sharing positive photos most of the time or weird memes. And I enjoy that. So I'm at Hunting Benjamin on Instagram. So those are 3 ways that are the easiest ways to find me. And if you want to listen to 90s music, I have a show Wednesday nights at 9 p.m. Eastern and Saturday nights at 10 p.m. Eastern on CIDI 99.1 FM in the Eastern Townships. Chances are you're outside the broadcast range, but it is broadcast online, CIDI991.com. You can find their little player and you can listen to me play music mostly from the 90s on Wednesdays and Saturdays.
That's awesome. I love it. Well, like I said, that ends this particular episode of Two Geeks Talking. You can, of course, find this interview and 1,200 plus others on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/TGT Media. Of course, the podcast is found on all of your favorite podcast platforms, whatever that may be. Just search Two Geeks Talking. That's TWO, not the number 2 for the love of God. Please just search TWO Geeks Talking. And social media wise, you can find me everywhere at Kurt Sasso or at Two Geeks Talking. Other than that, I want to thank you again for coming on the show. And as I say every week, everyone has a story to tell. It's up to me to help bring that out. Thanks for listening and watching on Two Geeks Talking.